Mixed martial arts is an exceptionally brutal discipline. Not only do fighters often suffer significant damage inside the octagon, but their training routines are also known to be among the most grueling. Throughout their athletic careers, MMA practitioners endure physical stress that can only be described as inhuman. Kevin Randleman. Today's video focuses mostly on the veterans of mixed martial arts, those who are often regarded as the trailblazers and true pioneers of the sport. Many of them, as you might recall, looked like they had stepped right out of a comic book. This was partly due to the near-total absence of doping control at the time, and partly because fighters had complete freedom in crafting their own image. One of the most striking figures from the early 2000s was, without question, the American heavyweight Kevin Randleman. An incredibly athletic wrestler at his core, Randleman came to embody, in many ways, the essence of his generation. He had a distinct and unforgettable presence. Despite standing just under 5 feet 10 inches, a modest height for a heavyweight, he possessed astonishing strength and a physique that seemed sculpted from stone. People often joke that, during his prime, his body might as well have contained half the elements on the periodic table, and truth be told, he never really tried to hide it afterward. Still, what people remember most is that he was a UFC heavyweight champion, a Pride veteran, and the same man who once drove Fedor Emelianenko headfirst into the mat. But there's another side to Kevin Randleman's legacy, one that hardcore fans know all too well, and it's far from uplifting. It has to do with his health. Once he stepped away from the sport, the years of relentless physical punishment and the toll of performance-enhancing substances began to show. His immune system had all but collapsed, and he became extremely vulnerable to dangerous infections. The most devastating was a severe staph infection, Staphylococcus aureus, that his body, unfortunately, couldn't fight. At one point, holes literally started forming in his torso, each several inches across, cutting deep into his chest cavity. It was as if his body had begun to decay while he was still alive. For years, this heavyweight legend battled one organ failure after another. And what you're hearing now? It's just a small glimpse into the painful journey Randleman went through in his final chapter. I was in a really bad way when I landed in the hospital. My body started to swell, my testicles puffed up, everything just expanded. I was ballooning right before their eyes. Man, I felt absolutely awful lying there in that place. My organs were shutting down, and nothing was getting better. I went from around 185 pounds to over 260 in just 2 days. I looked like a sluggish, bloated mess. It felt like any bruise on the inside of my body could turn into something serious, like it could spark another infection. That's the kind of risk I live with because of the path I chose. But even so, I know I have to start taking care of myself. On February 11th, 2016, at the age of 44, Kevin Randleman passed away. The official cause was acute heart failure, which itself was the result of long-standing health complications. TJ Grant. These days, few remember the name of this former UFC lightweight title contender. And yet, TJ Grant was on the verge of securing a fight against the reigning champion, Benson Henderson, who at the time seemed untouchable. The Canadian fighter had built up an active 5-fight win streak. His most recent victory in that run was a decisive finish over the then highly regarded Gray Maynard. A title shot was promised, and it looked like everything was set. But then came an unexpected turn. First, TJ was forced to take a break due to an injury, and shortly after, he quietly stepped away from the sport altogether. For a long time, fans speculated, could Grant really walk away at the peak of his form, just one step from the title, because of what was seen as a relatively standard MMA injury? That injury was a concussion, something not uncommon in the world of mixed martial arts. However, Grant's case turned out to be far from typical. First, the concussion he suffered during a post-Maynard training session was quite severe and brought with it a host of troubling symptoms. And second, this wasn't an isolated incident. Over the previous few years, similar issues had been recurring, and each new one carried increasingly serious risks. Eventually faced with a difficult reality, Grant weighed his options and made the only decision that truly made sense for himself and his family. As he later admitted, while he still holds on to some fond memories from his fighting career, what that chapter of his life really left him with was a collection of injuries and debts. And once he finally recovered physically from the toll his past had taken, he had no choice but to step into a different world and search for a regular, everyday job. Alan Crowder T. Jay Grant wasn't the only one forced to leave the sport due to brain-related issues. Something similar unfolded in the life of former UFC heavyweight Alan Crowder, a tough, resilient fighter whose career came to a halt not so long ago. Back in 2017, he earned his way into the organization by securing a victory during Dana White's Contender Series. Crowder made his promotional debut shortly afterward, but lost to Justin Willis. He managed to bounce back by defeating former football player Greg Hardy, which improved his standing in the division. However, in June of 2019, Crowder stepped into the cage with a surging Jairzinho Rosenstruck, and the Surinamese striker knocked him out just 9 seconds into the fight. But that lightning-fast finish wasn't the worst part of the night for Crowder. The real damage came afterward. The aftermath of that knockout led to serious health complications, ones that couldn't be ignored. Not long after, Allen found himself having to make a difficult, life-changing decision. I'm stepping away from MMA because of memory issues. After my last 3 fights, I suffered 3 concussions. These memory lapses are becoming more and more frequent. I used to be able to take a punch without a problem, but after catching a solid jab in one bout, I realized something had shifted. My head just isn't what it used to be. Maybe it's the cumulative damage finally catching up to me. Chris Holdsworth. At one point, this fighter was considered one of the most promising rising stars in the UFC's bantamweight division. Chris Holdsworth trained out of the renowned Team Alpha Male Gym in Sacramento, a camp that became a hub for many top-tier athletes in the lighter weight classes of the world's leading promotion. The team itself was founded by Jorija Faber, and over time, the Alpha Males turned their gym into a globally recognized brand, thanks in no small part to the other big names that followed: TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, Chad Mendes, Joe Benavidez, just to name a few of the killers that came out of Team Alpha Male. And it was in that kind of company that Holdsworth trained for several years. Chris, over the course of his brief career, had time to compete in only 6 professional fights, 2 of which, his final bouts, took place in the UFC. He was just 27 years old when an incident at the gym forced him to hang up the gloves, despite holding a flawless record of 6 wins and 0 losses. As it later came to light, Chris Holdsworth became a victim of Dillashaw. TJ, at one point, left Team Alpha Male, which led to him becoming somewhat of an outcast, an outright enemy to his former teammates. And in the aftermath, those who had once trained with him began sharing some less than flattering stories. One of the most striking came from Holdsworth himself. According to Chris, TJ was always overly aggressive during training. During boxing sparring, he might throw a knee to your face. During BJJ rolls, you could catch an elbow. One day we were doing a light MMA spar. I shot for a takedown, he sprawled, and I ended up on all 4s. While I was down on my hands and knees, he drove a full-force knee straight into the top of my head. That shot gave me a concussion, and that concussion ended my career. Mirko Filipovic. The story of the legendary Croatian heavyweight is well known to anyone who's followed striking sports. Over the course of his career, Mirko Filipovic, better known by his nickname, Crow Kipe, collected a number of prestigious titles. He won the Pride Grand Prix in the openweight division, and later went on to conquer the G1 kickboxing tournament under classic K1 rules. On top of that, the Croatian fighter also came out on top in the Rizin Grand Prix, and did so at an age many would already consider past their prime. Throughout his long journey, he competed in nearly every major promotion on the planet: UFC, Bellator, Pride, Rizin, K1, and more. For fans in post-Soviet countries, Crow Cop is especially memorable for his bouts with the Emelianenko brothers during his run in Japan's Pride organization. He famously knocked out Alexander with his trademark left high kick. Against Fader, however, he fell short, losing a clear decision in their heavyweight title fight. Crow Cop kept fighting actively until the age of 44, and didn't seem to have any plans of slowing down. Unfortunately, it was his health that ultimately stopped him. In 2019, Mirko revealed that he had suffered a stroke. According to many medical experts, even someone who appeared as physically fit as Crow Cop could be hit by such a condition, largely due to the extreme physical strain his body had endured over the years. Be that as it may, after the incident, he was forced to make an abrupt exit from professional mixed martial arts. And this happened while he was riding a 10-fight winning streak. Renato Babalu Sobral, one of the toughest Brazilians to ever step into a cage, Renato Babalu Sobral went toe-to-toe with a long list of the sport's biggest legends. And naturally, that kind of mileage didn't come without a cost. Babalu walked away from professional fighting a bit earlier than most. He retired several years before turning 40, and in glimpses he's shared since, it's clear that life after the cage hasn't exactly been easy. Nowadays, I struggle just to walk in a straight line. and I've lost vision in my left eye. That's a steep price to pay. I can't keep my balance. My sense of stability is practically gone. When I'm on the mat, either at a jiu-jitsu tournament or during training, I feel like some of that balance comes back. But in everyday life, it's a different story. Simple things become a real challenge. Mikhail Ilyukin, Dan Henderson, Fedor Emelianenko, Kevin Randleman, Chuck Liddell, Mauricio Rua, Chael Sonnen, Gegard Mousasi, and Robbie Lawler. These names and quite a few more stood across from Renato Sobral inside the ring or cage. Over the course of his career, the Brazilian fought under the banners of UFC, Strikeforce, Rings, ONE, and Bellator. Jeff Monson, too, a controversial figure in his own right, was once a standout in both grappling and mixed martial arts. Jeff Monson earned world champion titles in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and claimed victory at prestigious ADCC tournaments. He also made a name for himself in mixed martial arts. At his peak, the heavyweight known as the Snowman competed in the UFC and even fought his way into a title bout. But as the years went by, Jeff's performance declined significantly, and he didn't manage to step away when the time was right. On top of that, he made a number of rather unconventional decisions, and his fighting career stretched on far longer than most. In 2015, Monson acquired Russian citizenship, openly declared himself a socialist, and made several politically charged statements that drew widespread attention. Eventually, he became directly involved in Russian politics, joining the Krasnogorsk City Council as a deputy. Surprisingly, Jeff is still competing, even though he's already 52 years old. His record now includes a string of losses in all sorts of bizarre fringe matchups, and his health has clearly been in decline for some time. Monson has battled chronic back issues for years, and not the mild kind. At one point, a widely circulated rumor in the MMA community claimed that Jeff was physically unable to sit due to extreme pain, and from multiple accounts that seemed to be true. Not long ago, the veteran admitted that things have improved somewhat. He's able to sit occasionally, like on couches during press conferences for Russian YouTube promotions. But even so, calling Monson a healthy man would be a stretch. Zabit Magomedsharipov. In July of 2022, MMA fans across the globe were hit with disappointing news. One of the most dynamic and promising featherweights in recent UFC history, Zabit Magomedsharipov, announced his retirement from the sport. What made it all the more surprising was his age, just 31. For this weight class, that's close to the athletic prime. The highly respected Dagestani fighter hadn't competed since 2019, yet at that time, he was ranked third in the division and riding a 6-fight win streak, clearly positioned for a title shot. But fight after fight fell through, and the opportunity never materialized. Eventually, Zabit made the decision to walk away, having never been given the chance he had earned. At first, it seemed his departure stemmed from principle, a stand against the endless waiting and the lack of clarity. But over time, more and more rumors began to surface about health concerns, which painted a different picture, one that left far less hope for a future comeback. Shortly after his win over Calvin Kattar, Magomedsharipov revealed that during his training camp, he had been dealing with serious immune system issues. His body simply couldn't withstand the constant overload. Zabit's background in the sport runs deep. He's often said in interviews that he began training at a very young age. Later, members of his team confirmed that these immune system complications were indeed the main reason behind his difficult decision to step away. There were even whispers that a final decision would be made after a certain medical procedure, though the nature of that operation was never disclosed publicly. No one ever officially confirmed that story. However, in 2022, Zabit formally announced his retirement, and it's hard to deny that health problems likely played a major role in that choice. Michael Bisping. The iconic Count is remembered by fans as one of the most charismatic, though not necessarily the most dominant champions in UFC history. Michael Bisping had a sharp tongue, a knack for humor, and managed to pull off a few massive wins. Then, almost by chance, he ended up capturing the title. In 2016, the Brit stepped in as a late replacement for Chris Weidman and knocked out Luke Rockhold in the very first round. After that, he defended the belt twice, suffered a couple of losses, and in 2017, called it a career. It's worth noting that Bisping took a serious amount of punishment over the course of his fighting years, and while fans saw the knockouts, few realized just how much long-term damage he'd sustained competing at the highest level. In 2013, during a bout with Vitor Belfort, Bisping took a brutal head kick that led to a detached retina. Over time, the condition worsened, eventually leaving him completely blind in one eye. The most incredible part? Despite not being the most naturally gifted fighter of his era, Bisping became a world champion and a near-mythic figure, fighting inside the octagon with only one working eye. The truth only came to light in 2019, when Bisping casually popped out a glass prosthetic during an interview and admitted that he'd had to deceive UFC doctors more than once just to keep competing. Gary Goodridge. The legendary Canadian heavyweight is well known among Russian fans for his fights against Fedor Emelianenko and Oleg Taktarov, along with several other battles against early-era MMA icons. Gary Goodridge competed in the UFC, Pride, K1, and many other high-profile organizations, squaring off against some of the wildest heavyweights of his time. Naturally, a career forged in such unforgiving conditions left its mark. But in Goodridge's case, it seems fate dealt him an especially harsh hand. He stepped away from the sport carrying a long list of serious diagnoses: Alzheimer's disease, traumatic brain injury, atrophy of certain brain regions, and chronic depression. That's just part of what he's been dealing with. Gary has long since lost the ability to speak fluently or walk with a steady gait. On top of that, he's also battling damage to internal organs that may never fully recover. Back in the early days of MMA, Goodridge wasn't one to shy away from the enhancement substances that were widely used at the time. Now, he's left to pay the price. A price that's been both painful and permanent. Alongside the speech issues, my clarity of thought started to slip over time. There are moments when I completely zone out of whatever situation I'm in, whether it's dealing with everyday tasks or just talking on the phone. I've also become a lot less patient with people around me, even with my own kids. This is how 56-year-old Goodridge describes his day-to-day life. And from his words, it's clear that a career in professional MMA left him with little chance for a peaceful retirement. Friends, in today's somber list, we've gathered the stories of MMA stars whose health took a serious toll as a direct result of their years in the sport. Friends, in today's rather grim roundup, we've highlighted MMA stars whose health was deeply affected by years of competing at the highest level. But the truth is, there are far more stories like these than we could fit into a single video. So be sure to drop a comment below and let us know whose journey you'd like to see covered next. We just might put together a follow-up. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any important updates.